First, only weeks into this new Labor government, and already there are two serious tests now weighing on the Prime Minister, and both relate to national security. The first is how they handle the acquisition of our nuclear-powered submarines, and the second relates to terrorism. Now, on the submarines, there's always been a worry that when this was announced, that the then Labor opposition was never as keen as Scott Morrison on last year's AUKUS agreement. Sure, Labor swiftly endorsed the deal, but in a sop to the Greens, who were bitterly against it, Labor made their support for nuclear power at sea conditional on their continuing an illogical opposition to nuclear power on land. At the time, the Morrison government said it would spend 18 months deciding the precise form that Australia's nuclear sub acquisition would take. Peter Dutton, the then Defence Minister, now of course opposition leader, well, he has today told us what they were planning. Indeed, what was already well underway and ahead of any deadline. In a piece for the Australian newspaper, Peter Dutton said he was confident Australia would be able to acquire 2 Virginia-class nuclear submarines from the United States by 2030, so within the next 8 years. We would then be able to build the next 8, he said, here in Australia, with the first of them becoming operational sometime around 2040. Now, critically, getting the first 2 nuclear subs here by the end of the decade would avoid this so-called capability gap created as the existing Collins-class subs go into a major refit at about the same time. Now, remember, we've got 6 current Collins-class subs. We're lucky to even have 3, let alone 4 of them, operational at any one time. It takes them several weeks to go from their base in WA to the South China Sea. Their maximum speed's about half that of a nuclear submarine. They need regular refuelling, and they have to come up to the surface every few days or so to recharge their batteries, where, of course, on the surface, they can be detected and destroyed by a sophisticated adversary.
The advice was pretty clear and specific to us, and that is that you couldn't have the diesel-powered submarine really working, in some parts where it needs to work in the, shores off our country, etc., beyond 2035. And if Labor thinks that there's a cheap option here to build a new diesel electric submarine and to have that operating in our waters, which wouldn't hit the water until the 2030s, then I think that's folly.
That's the former Defence Minister, now Opposition Leader Peter Dutton, on radio this morning. As our main strategic deterrent, carrying the weaponry that we could throw at a potential adversary to warn them off, it's utterly inadequate now, the Collins class, let alone in a decade's time, when they'll be that much older and fewer of them, thanks to the need for these extensive refits. That's why Dutton's plan to get the well-proven, already in service, American-built nuclear subs within 8 years makes a lot of sense.
Well, Ray, I thought we could be in a position to make an announcement around July, August. It was always the intention to not get to the end of the 18-month consultation, but to get partway through it, make a decision on which submarine we were going to go with, and then use the balance of the 18 months to work out the detail of that, and we've been pretty clear about that at the time.
So well underway, he said, there would have been an announcement this year, but here's the danger. That instead of getting the first 2 nuclear subs from America as quickly as possible, while pushing on with building the rest here in Australia, the risk now is that the Albanese government is going to decide we need some sort of interim conventional sub, a so-called son of Collins, built in South Australia. That'd add yet another submarine build into the mix in what already is a project that's years overdue and billions over budget. This son of Collins is the old Rudd-Gillard government plan, and it's been reheated and it's circulating now amongst defence johnnies in Canberra. It was a dumb idea then, but even worse resurrected now, a decade down the track. Even if the Albanese government was mad enough to go with this plan, it'd still take 10 years plus to get any new Australian-made conventional subs up and built, given that we haven't built a submarine in this country for more than 20 years. Remember, Dutton's plan already underway, getting nuclear subs from the United States already built here in 8 years. Why on earth would we go backwards and start building a conventional sub as an interim measure when it would suffer all the operational limitations I've outlined just before that we have now with the Collins class. And worst of all, by kicking the nuclear subs option even further down the road, it would mean that we'd probably never get them, which is perhaps what some of Labor's hard left hope, given they even hate the word nuclear. Now, make no mistake, any decision by the new government to build conventional subs here in Australia rather than get these Virginia-class subs from the US is a decision never to get nuclear submarines.
I really worry now that Labor's walking away from AUKUS, from the submarine deal, and that is clearly not in our national interest, as we saw with that fighter jet the other day.
Peter Dutton's right to be concerned. It would be the new government walking away from its previous bipartisan commitment to give us, for the first time ever, a serious strategic deterrent, such that we could inflict massive damage on any adversary, even a superpower, and play a substantial role in the defence of the Indo-Pacific. I can't think of anything more seismic. This is what I fear the new government is on the edge of doing, to appease the build it in Adelaide cargo cult, to get the Greens off their back internally, and perhaps even, critically, appease China. Now, the other issue, I said there were two tonight, the other issue I think is giving the PM a fair headache on national security is, of course, terrorism. Yesterday's High Court decision to overturn the previous government's ability to keep some terrorists out of the country by cancelling their Australian citizenship places us at somewhat greater risk of a domestic terror attack. Not immediate, of course, as most of these Islamic State terrorists remain overseas, either on the loose or locked up in prison. But this decision to deny governments the right to cancel their Australian citizenship where they have dual nationality will now embolden them to get their Australian passports back and, when they can, return home. We know that many hardened Islamic State fighters haven't given up the cause. While we've all been focused on COVID, their training and indoctrination has continued apace. We also know that if they return home, it would not be easy to try them in an Australian court, given the evidence needed to convict to our legal standard is almost impossible to collect from a foreign battlefield. When these laws were brought in by the former coalition government, the new Attorney General, Labor's Mark Dreyfus, he never supported them. He's now responsible for what happens next. Today he issued a statement saying he's seeking urgent advice. I think radio broadcaster Ben Fordham spoke for the majority of Australians when he said this morning.
His family has been campaigning to bring him home to Australia, but we don't want him here. The High Court has backed the bloke who was involved with Islamic State, part of a cell that wanted to execute an innocent Australian. This is a major test for the new government. They must do everything in their powers, as the previous government did, to keep these freaks out of Australia.
Let's just see here, like on nuclear subs, if Labor can be trusted.